picture yourself standing on a vast African plain nearly 2 million years ago. The midday sun is relentless. Heat ripples across the ground. Every step feels heavier than the last. Around you, zebras, antelope, and predators all wear thick coats of fur, natural armor against the world. But one strange creature doesn't. Its skin is exposed. Sweat glistens across its body. At first glance, it looks fragile, almost unfinished. That creature is your ancestor. By every rule of survival, it shouldn't have lasted long. Fur protects mammals from scorching sunlight, freezing nights, biting insects, and countless dangers. Losing it should have been a disaster. Yet somehow, these nearly hairless humans didn't disappear. They spread across continents, survived brutal climates, and eventually became the most successful large mammal on Earth. Think about that for a second. If fur was such a powerful advantage, why would evolution ever allow humans to lose almost all of it? But that's only half the mystery. Long after the thick body hair vanished, one patch refused to follow the same path. On the faces of countless men, beards continued to grow. Sometimes thick, sometimes thin, but rarely disappearing altogether. Pretty strange, right? If evolution had decided that less fur was the key to survival, why leave one of the most noticeable patches behind? Was it simply an accident? A useless leftover from our past? Or was it serving a purpose so important that millions of years of evolution chose to keep it? The deeper we investigate, the stranger this story becomes. And the first clue isn't hidden in the beard at all. It's hidden in the sweat running down human skin. The obvious answer seems surprisingly simple. Humans lost their fur because they got too hot. At first, that explanation sounds almost too convenient. But the evidence points in that direction. Unlike lions waiting in the shade or wolves hunting in short bursts, our ancestors began chasing prey for hours under the blazing African sun. They weren't the fastest animals on the savannah. They didn't have razor-sharp claws or powerful jaws. Their greatest weapon was endurance. Picture an exhausted antelope sprinting away from danger. It escapes, then stops to recover. Minutes later, the humans are still coming. Again and again, the animal is forced to run until its body can no longer cool itself. Eventually, it overheats and collapses. Researchers call this persistence hunting, and a nearly hairless body may have made it possible. Without a thick coat trapping heat, human skin could release warmth far more efficiently. Millions of sweat glands pumped moisture onto the surface, and as that sweat evaporated, it carried heat away like a built-in cooling system. Instead of avoiding the hottest part of the day, our ancestors could keep moving while many predators rested in the shade. Think about that for a second. What looked like a weakness may have been one of humanity's greatest evolutionary advantages. Losing fur wasn't a mistake, it was part of a remarkable survival strategy. That should answer the mystery. Except, it doesn't. Because if overheating was the only problem evolution was trying to solve, then why didn't it remove all of our hair? Eyebrows remained. Eyelashes remained. Hair stayed on our heads. And on millions of men, thick beards continued to grow. If every strand of fur was a liability, those should have disappeared too. Instead, evolution made a far more selective choice. And that suggests something much bigger was happening. For a long time, people assumed evolution worked like an engineer. If something was no longer useful, it simply disappeared. By that logic, human hair should have followed one clear path. Less fur, less heat, better survival. It sounds reasonable until you look closer. Across the animal kingdom, evolution rarely erases a feature unless keeping it becomes more costly than losing it. In fact, many traits survive because they quietly take on an entirely new job. Human hair seems to tell exactly that kind of story. Take the hair on your head. At first, it appears to break the overheating theory. But researchers noticed something surprising. While thick body fur traps heat, hair concentrated on the scalp can actually shield the brain from the sun's intense radiation. It acts like a natural umbrella, reducing the amount of heat reaching one of the body's most vulnerable organs. Suddenly, keeping hair on the head makes perfect sense. The same pattern appears with eyebrows and eyelashes. They don't exist to keep us warm. They protect our eyes from sweat, dust, and rain, allowing us to see clearly while moving through harsh environments. Think about that. Evolution wasn't removing hair at random. It was keeping it wherever it still solved an important problem. But then we arrive at the beard. Unlike scalp hair or eyelashes, a beard offers little protection from sunlight. It doesn't help cool the body. It doesn't improve vision. And unlike body fur, it grows most prominently after puberty, and almost exclusively in men. That's an unusual detail. If beards were simply leftover fur, why would their growth depend so heavily on age and hormones? Why would evolution preserve a feature that appears only when someone reaches adulthood? That wasn't the pattern of a forgotten survival tool, it was the pattern of a signal. And once researchers began treating the beard as a message instead of a blanket, the mystery became even deeper. That idea led researchers to ask a completely different question. What if a beard wasn't meant to protect a man from nature at all? What if it was meant to influence other people? To find out, scientists designed a series of experiments that seemed almost too simple. Volunteers were shown photographs of the same men's faces. In one image, the men were clean shaven. In the next, they had full beards. Everything else remained identical. The researchers expected only small differences in opinion. That isn't what happened. Again and again, people described the bearded faces as older, stronger, and more dominant. Even when the facial structure underneath hadn't changed, the beard dramatically altered how others interpreted the same person. A few weeks of facial hair was enough to create the impression of greater maturity and physical capability. Think about that for a second. The beard wasn't changing the man. It was changing the story other people believed about him. Anthropologists began connecting these findings with another curious observation. Thick beards usually appear after testosterone levels rise during puberty, the very stage when young males begin competing for status, resources, and potential mates. At exactly the moment social competition becomes more important, the beard begins to announce that transition to everyone around them. That was a remarkable clue. It suggested that, unlike most of our remaining hair, the beard might not have survived because it offered a physical advantage. It may have survived because it offered a social one. But if that's true, another puzzle immediately appears. Around the world, not every man grows the same beard. Some develop thick, full facial hair. Others grow only a few scattered patches. Entire populations show striking differences. If beards evolved as an important signal, why didn't evolution give every man the exact same one? That question would lead the story far beyond facial hair and into the surprising role of culture, genetics, and human choice. More than 150 years before scientists could analyze DNA, one man became fascinated by a question most people barely noticed. His name was Charles Darwin. As he studied animals from around the world, Darwin realized that survival wasn't always the whole story. Some features seemed too extravagant, too costly, or too impractical to exist if nature only rewarded efficiency. The peacock's enormous tail was his favorite example. It made flying harder and made the bird easier for predators to spot. Yet, generation after generation, it remained why? Darwin believed the answer wasn't survival alone. Sometimes evolution was shaped by something just as powerful: choice. Imagine Darwin sitting at his desk, surrounded by notebooks filled with observations from years of travel. The more examples he collected, the more he saw the same pattern repeating. Animals weren't evolving only to defeat predators. They were evolving to impress rivals, attract mates, and communicate strength without a fight. Then he turned his attention to humans. Facial hair stood out immediately. Unlike body fur, a beard usually appears when a boy becomes a man. It grows at the exact stage when social competition becomes more intense. To Darwin, that timing didn't feel like a coincidence. He proposed that beards may have been shaped, at least in part, by sexual selection, the process where traits spread because they influence how individuals compete with or attract one another. It was a bold idea, and for decades, many people dismissed it as speculation. But modern research has slowly uncovered evidence that points back toward Darwin's original insight. His notebooks may have contained the first clue to a mystery that scientists are still unraveling today. Because if beards evolved as a signal to other humans, then the real story isn't about hair at all. It's about the invisible social battles that helped shape our species. Once researchers began looking beyond humans, they noticed something remarkable. The beard wasn't an isolated mystery. It was part of a much larger pattern that appears again and again across the natural world. Picture a male lion standing at the edge of his territory. His mane doesn't help him run faster. In fact, it can make him hotter under the African sun. Yet rival males often hesitate before challenging a lion with a darker, fuller mane. It sends a message before a fight even begins. The same idea appears in red deer. During the breeding season, males grow massive antlers that require enormous amounts of energy to produce. Moose carry antlers so heavy they can weigh over 30 kilograms. Peacocks drag spectacular tails that make escaping predators more difficult. From a survival standpoint, none of these traits seem efficient, but they were never meant to be. They evolved because animals aren't only competing against nature. They're competing with each other. Think about that for a second. Humans have always lived in social groups where reputation could matter just as much as raw strength. Long before cities or written history, people constantly judged who looked experienced, who appeared trustworthy, who seemed dangerous, and who was ready to lead. Every visible feature became part of that silent conversation. History reveals the same pattern. Ancient Egyptian pharaohs wore ceremonial false beards as symbols of divine authority. Viking warriors celebrated impressive facial hair as a mark of adulthood and status. Across parts of the Middle East, Europe, and South Asia, beards often became associated with wisdom, leadership, or honor. Even in cultures where shaving became fashionable, the decision itself carried social meaning. Suddenly, this wasn't just a story about biology. It was a story about civilization, across species, across continents, and across thousands of years. Physical traits kept evolving into social signals. But one question still refused to disappear. If beards truly helped communicate strength or maturity, why did evolution leave some men with magnificent, while giving others almost none at all? If beards were truly an evolutionary advantage, you'd expect every man on Earth to grow one with ease. But that's not what we see. Travel across the world, and the pattern changes dramatically. In some populations, thick facial hair is common. In others, many men grow only sparse or patchy beards. The differences can be striking even though they're all modern humans. At first, that seems to challenge everything we've uncovered. But evolution rarely produces a single solution that fits everyone. As human groups spread across Africa, Europe, Asia, and eventually the rest of the world, they encountered different climates, different lifestyles, and different populations. Over thousands of generations, small genetic differences accumulated. Some genes influenced how sensitive hair follicles became to testosterone. Others affected the thickness, density, and rate of facial hair. Yet, genetics isn't the whole story. History is filled with periods where culture pushed in the opposite direction. Ancient Romans often viewed a clean-shaven face as a sign of discipline and civilization. Centuries later, many European kings proudly wore enormous beards to project authority. The biology stayed largely the same, but society kept changing the message. Think about that. The same beard could symbolize wisdom in one era, rebellion in another, and professionalism, or the lack of it, in another. That's a rare situation in evolution. A biological trait had become deeply intertwined with culture, fashion, and identity, which raises one final mystery. Maybe evolution didn't preserve the beard because everyone preferred it. Maybe it survived because, whether admired or rejected, people simply couldn't stop noticing it. And that subtle difference may hold the deepest answer of all. Here's the twist that changes everything. We often ask, why did humans keep their beards? But evolution doesn't think in terms of keeping or removing features. It only asks one question. Does this trait still provide an advantage? For body fur, the answer gradually became no, as our ancestors evolved into endurance hunters. Staying cool became more valuable than staying covered. Thick fur trapped heat, while bare skin combined with millions of sweat glands turned the human body into an extraordinary cooling machine. That trade-off helped our ancestors outlast animals that were faster and stronger. But the beard was playing an entirely different game. It covered only a small part of the body, so it barely interfered with cooling. At the same time, it transformed one of the most important parts of a human being, the face. Think about it. The human face is where we recognize identity, read emotions, judge age, estimate strength, and decide whom to trust. Unlike most mammals, humans depend on incredibly complex social relationships. We don't survive by muscle alone. We survive by forming alliances, attracting partners, avoiding unnecessary conflict, and communicating without saying a word. A beard became part of that silent language. To rivals, it could make a man appear older, stronger, or more experienced. To potential mates, it could signal maturity and healthy hormone development. To a social group, it became another clue, fair or unfair, for interpreting status and identity. Whether those impressions were always accurate didn't matter. What mattered was that people consistently reacted to them. And that's the crucial difference. Baby fur was shaped primarily by the environment. Beards were shaped largely by other humans. In other words, we didn't lose our fur because evolution stopped caring about hair. We lost it because different parts of our hair began serving different purposes. Most body hair became a burden in a hot climate, while facial hair remained useful in a species where social interaction had become one of the greatest survival tools of all. The beard wasn't simply the last piece of our ancient fur. It was evidence that, long before we built cities or wrote history, our greatest challenge was no longer just surviving nature. It was learning to survive each other. Now return to that endless African plain. The sun still burns overhead. The air still shimmers with heat. A nearly hairless human walks steadily across the landscape while stronger, faster animals retreat into the shade. At first glance, that fragile figure seems hopelessly outmatched. But appearances can be deceiving. The bare skin that once looked like a weakness became one of humanity's greatest strengths. And the beard that seemed like an evolutionary leftover turned out to tell a completely different story. One written not by the climate, but by human relationships. Think about how extraordinary that is. Millions of years ago, evolution wasn't just changing our bodies, it was quietly changing the way we understood one another. Every conversation, every rivalry, every partnership, and every first impression became part of the same evolutionary experiment. Survival was no longer only about escaping predators or enduring the heat. It was also about living successfully among other people. Perhaps that's why the story of the human beard has never really been about hair at all. It's about the moment our species began relying less on fur to face the natural world, and more on communication, cooperation, and social intelligence to shape its future. In the end, the last patch of fur we kept may be a reminder of the greatest transformation in human history, the day our most important battlefield stopped being the wilderness and became each other.